Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is that while the world watches Russia and Ukraine, I watch other dangers. Not that Russia is unimportant or not dangerous. What Russia says, does, and doesn't say, and doesn't do is very important. But many other things are happening in the world. They must be monitored carefully so that surprises, as they always do, don't catch us off guard. In the realm of foreign affairs, surprises are synonymous with catastrophe. And that's why I'm watching Iran, and not merely nuclear Iran. During these last few weeks, Iran has seen protests by Iranian youth standing up and shouting, showing their discontent with their future and their potential jobs. We covered some of that. Iranian youth does not believe that if they remain in Iran, their future will be rosy. As political movements go, that is to be expected. Youth has historically been the backbone of political movements for change. That's why university campuses are such hotbeds for ideas and revolution. This is the case around the world, not just in the United States or in Iran. The civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, getting the United States out of Vietnam, were the heart and soul of American campuses. The women's movement, the peace and love movement were all about youth. The sexual revolution was obviously about youth. Many of these movements had music accompanying their causes, and that it was the music that drew more youth into the movement. Think of Peter, Paul and Mary, Arlo Guthrie, Bob Dylan, were all campus icons. Most of these movements pitted youth against the establishment. It was about change. Change, youth argued, for the better. The movements challenged convention. That's why long hair, bell-bottoms, and the Beatles were part of the revolution. The conventional world, the adult world at the time, the establishment, had short hair and straight-leg pants. The music, Woodstock, hair, the play, the movie, explain it all. The reasons are obvious. Motivated youth care. Motivated youth take stock and looks to their future. When we apply this model to Iran, youthful revolution is to be expected. The precedent for them has been set. It was the youth of Iran who kidnapped the Americans and held them hostage in Tehran. It was the universities that were the breeding ground for support of the Ayatollah, and the youth who orchestrated the ousting of the Shah in 1979. That's what it was all about. But wait. There's a new twist in the arena of the Iranian dissatisfaction and protest. Retirees and pensioners are coming out to protest, and they have organized on their own. They are not add-ons to the youth rallies. Two ends of the spectrum united in dissatisfaction. This is not the norm, not in Iran and not anywhere. Adults do not join rallies. They do not run out and protest unless things are very bad. Adults do not rally about the future. When senior citizens organize rallies, they shout about the here and now, not about the future. Reports from Iran, mostly Twitter feeds and videos picked up by the Iranian expatriate media, show workers attending rallies in major cities, protesting food shortages, low salaries, even salaries that have not been paid. Thousands of seniors in Tehran, Isfahan, Rasht came out. Their message was, enough of injustice. Food on our table has gone up like smoke in the air. The message of the pensioners is profound. Through protests, people are calling for change. Twitter messages are being posted of the protests. That's how we know that the Mian Ab sugarcane workers were on strike for over a week, and that thousands of people regularly protest in front of the Majlis, the Iranian parliament. And that's where the healthcare workers chose to protest their working conditions. Judiciary workers protested there too. They shouted at the parliamentary speaker, Mohammed Makar Jalabaf, chanting, liar, liar, and Jalabaf disgrace. And if our problem is not resolved, we will shut down the justice system. The Iranian judicial system is breaking down. Many are resigning. There is very little Iran can do to stop any of these protests. The protests are growing and spreading across the country and across populations because dissatisfaction is growing. And yet, Iranian leadership remains consumed by their narrow vision and limited objectives. The obvious lesson from these protests and the economic turmoil ripping the country apart is that the priorities of Iranian leadership is clearly divergent from their citizens' daily needs. A huge internal conflict is almost inevitable. Iranian leadership is treating their citizens as residents without rights. Neither the needs nor the wishes of the people are relevant. The leadership sets priorities based on their own desires and issues. There has always been an overarching mantra of Islam first in Iran, but within that there was a sense of governance and responsibility to the people, but no more. The Iranian leadership believes first and foremost that the Shiite Islamic nature of the country is primary. Next, they believe that becoming a bulwark to attack the United States and the West will garner world support for their cause and will lift sanctions. Iranian leadership expends huge amounts of money and energy supporting terror and activities outside of Iran in Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, and elsewhere to pursue their agenda through proxies. All that money and energy could be directed inward. It should be directed inward. But ideology shades their perspective, their vision, their priorities. Not today, but in the end, the protesters will win in Iran, and I'll be watching. Coming up next, Points of View. First up is a column from the Jerusalem Post that was published on January 30th, 2022. It was written by Daniel Meron. The title of the column is Israel's Global Coronavirus Diplomacy Efforts Are Bearing Fruit. Subtitled, Israel is eager to join hands with the international community in order to effectively address the current global pandemic challenge as well as the ones to come. Meron is the Israeli diplomat in the Foreign Ministry responsible for the outreach and for helping countries who are in need regarding coronavirus. This is how he begins. 2 years into the pandemic, nations across the globe are still struggling to cope with the profound challenges that coronavirus poses. Israel is proud to be one of the countries on the front lines of responding to this unprecedented public health crisis. Israel's unique ability to deal with emergencies, improvise, and respond quickly and flexibly have all factored into the success in coping with the pandemic. With its rapid vaccine rollout last year, Israel was widely praised for delivering the world's fastest vaccination campaign in the first half of 2021, and as the first country to give booster shots to the public. Israel has important lessons to share. Therefore, it makes sense that the world looks to Israel as a go-to expert on how to manage the pandemic. Moreover, a core Jewish value teaches we must help the needy during difficult times, as well as those in need of medical care. Consequently, it is natural that Israel has gone to great lengths to support its friends in the international community. Now Meron gives details and examples of how Israel has helped. He writes, Israel has been heavily involved on the international coronavirus diplomacy scene, collaborating and exchanging information with countries around the world in order to save lives and help its partners cope with the public health crisis. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been at the forefront of this effort, leading the push to donate masks, respirators, and other essential medical equipment to countless countries. When India was being ravaged by a severe wave of coronavirus in April of last year, Israel sent entire plane loads filled with respirators and medical aid. When Romania was grappling with a crisis in November, we sent a team of 5 of our top medical experts to share Israel's experience in coping with similar such crises it had experienced in its hospitals. In Ghana, the Israeli embassy mobilized to produce and distribute masks to local medical teams. At the initiative of Foreign Minister Yair Lapid, Israel has also committed to donate over 1 million vaccine doses to African nations. Meron continues to give even more examples. These are examples that only now, in this column, are coming to light and being made public. Israel's Mashav, he writes, has brought medical staff and administrators from Tanzania, Rwanda, Guatemala, and many others to Israel for world-class seminars and lectures. Israel's not-for-profit sector has similarly mobilized to assist the international community. Israel Aid, one of Israel's leading NGOs, not just finished the 6-month project with Estadnini, where an Israeli team set up and managed an operations center for distributing vaccines, training medical staff, and more. Meron's conclusion is simple and plainly true. Israel wants to help, as he put it. Israel is eager to join hands with the international community in order to effectively address the current global pandemic challenge, as well as the ones to come. Ultimately, the world will only succeed in collectively overcoming this pandemic if we work together and cooperate. Moreover, health cooperation during the coronavirus crisis has served as an important bridge between nations and for peace. It is Israel's hope that Omicron will be the last of the pandemic, and we are looking forward to continuing to share our insights and experiences with the world in all spheres of crisis management and public health. Great observations, great column by Meron. Next up is a column by Louis René Beres, and it was published in The Jurist, a legal website which is co-sponsored by the University of Pittsburgh Law School. It was published on January 26, 2022. It's entitled International Law in the State of Nature, a Contradiction in Terms. This is an excellent but long essay. Beres begins with the Treaty of Westphalia and shows that its paradigm is faulty. He brings in Hobbes, Camus, Beckett, Francis Bacon, Galileo, Newton, and many other authors and philosophers. He begins with a powerful and thoughtful, provoking quote from Hobbes. Here we go. The state of nature as state of war. That's how he begins. From its modern beginnings in the 17th century, more precisely since the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, international law has presumed firm distinctions between national interest and world interest. Rather than recognize the organic wholeness and interdependence of all peoples, this false presumption has prodded nation states to embrace everyone for himself, orientations to foreign policy. The cumulative result of all such misdirected thinking has been grievously injurious and mercilessly lethal. In more expressly jurisprudential terms, this bitter result has made itself manifest in war, terrorism, and genocide. Beres suggests that the world community should be looking at issues and solving them together as a whole rather than as different nations. Solutions to conflicts could then more easily be found. Beres writes, there is more whenever scholars and policy makers speak of civilization, they should speak of law. No particular national leadership has any special primary obligations in this regard, nor could such a group reasonably afford to build any immediate security policies upon seemingly vague hopes. Beres concludes by asserting that the individual is not as important as the community, in his words. In closing, there is a related matter of will, whether personal or national or global. By definition, no pertinent task of will could ever prove more vital to American or planetary survival than our properly committed dedication to planetary oneness. The French philosopher Pierre de Chardin, the phenomenon of man, can point us in a genuinely productive direction. The egocentric ideal of a future reserved for those who have managed to attain egotistically the extremity of everyone for himself is false and against nature. No element can move and grow except with and by all others with itself. The directional imperative says it all. This is a fascinating piece, and I disagree with many elements in it, but I think it's important to look outside the box to find solutions to territorial conflicts, like the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I do not think Beres' suggestion will solve that conflict, but we should keep it in mind. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I'm going to show you 7 cartoons and memes and headlines today. First up is a cartoon that pokes fun at the horror and fear on the New York City subways. Those who do not know, I live in Manhattan, in New York City, and I take the subways and buses all the time. There is no question that people are afraid on the subways and buses. They hang out near the stairs or upstairs until the subways come into the station. Then they rush to get through the train's doors before they close. People's eyes are peeled. They're on alert. There is a significant police presence, but people are still afraid. They're being afraid of being pushed or stabbed or shot. In this cartoon, people are on the platform waiting for the subway train, and this is the announcement that comes over the loudspeaker. The next psycho shover will arrive in 2 minutes. Sometimes you just have to laugh. The next cartoon makes fun of CNN, its abysmal ratings, and its penchant for what many call fake news, and leaving out essential parts of stories. The elderly couple is sitting and watching CNN, and the new news anchor is Pinocchio. The woman says, I guess with all the scandals, poor ratings, and fake news, they needed an anchor to fit in. The next cartoon is a very funny twist of buying drugs. A drug dealer on the streets asks the passing couple, "Want drugs?" They respond, "No, thanks. Got any COVID test kits?" There were so many cartoons about the COVID test kits. It's unbelievable. This next one makes fun of the government issuing free test kits. A husband and wife are outside on a walk, and as they pass a pharmacy with a sign in the window saying that they are out of COVID tests, the husband says, "The government says home COVID tests will be free." His wife responds, "Well, so far, we're free from finding any." That's funny. These next three memes are about diets and weight loss. The pandemic has forced people to consider their weight and start thinking about dieting. The memes are hilarious. This one reads, "Brain cells, hair cells, skin cells all die constantly, but freaking fat cells seem to have eternal life." Now a play on the pandemic and the fact that for months people did not get dressed regularly and they did not exercise. The meme reads, "My going out clothes missed me so much. I put them on and they hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe." This last one is yet another example of how food became a central component of pandemic life. The meme reads, "The fridge is a perfect example of what matters is on the inside." In a moment, more of my own predictions and some perspective. An Israeli comedian wrote a song called "Dubai, Dubai."
איך אני מתרגשת. היי.
And the song is going viral in the Arabic world. Dubai, Dubai is a lampoon on the Abraham Accords. The name of the songwriter comedian is Noam Schuster Eliassi.
בכלל מאוד חשוב להעביר לי מסר של אהבה וסלם לכל ערבי, במיוחד אם הוא נמצא 4,000 קילומטר מפה. אז peace and love.
Singing her song in perfect unaccented Arabic, she pokes fun at Israel and at the Arab world. Here are some of the lines from the song. Israel goes to make peace with a country 1,500 miles away and forgets the Palestinians next door. Another, in Dubai, they forgot the siege on Gaza. Another, how nice it would be if only all the Arabs were from Dubai. Humor is much more wonderful. It's a vehicle dealing with tensions and problems and poking fun at politics. The Arabic world is not free to create their own humor. Monarchies are autocratic, and even though states which have elections and presidents are not really totally free democracies, humor about and criticism of government is punished in these states. So the comedian Noam Schuster Eliassi is an Israeli woman singing in the style of Eurovision to Israelis and Arabs alike. Her audiences relate to her observations. Her video viewers even laugh out loud, and it went viral throughout the Arab world.
Dubai, 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 Dubai.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced that he will be hosting Israeli President Isaac Herzog for an official visit to Turkey. Details were still being discussed between the two countries. Relations between Turkey and Israel have not been good since 2010, when the Mavi Marmara, a Turkish ship filled with activists, attempted to break the Israeli blockade of Gaza. Israeli commanders boarded the ship. 6 years later, 2016, Israel decided to pay $21 million to all the Turkish citizens killed in the Israeli raid. Things got even worse in 2018. After riots on the Gaza border, Israel responded to the rioting and the violence. And at that point, Turkey withdrew its ambassador from Israel, and Israel's ambassador was asked to leave Turkey. More recently, when an Israeli couple was arrested for spying in Turkey, the two presidents, Erdogan and Herzog, spoke and worked together to help free the couple. Even more recently than that, Turkish President called Herzog the Israeli president, to offer condolences on the death of his mother. The biggest bone of contention between Israel and Turkey is that Turkey is given refuge to Hamas leadership. The latest word on the street is that Erdogan has asked Hamas leadership to leave Turkey, that they have short visas, and that some Hamas leaders have been detained and even deported. Israel is not certain that all that is verifiable. They do not trust Erdogan. Regardless of what Turkey says, the Turks are still major supporters of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza. Will the visit bear fruit? Only time will tell. Mohammed Dahlan has secured 1 million COVID shots and delivered them to Gaza through Egypt. Dahlan is from Gaza, but he now lives in Abu Dhabi, in the UAE. He moved there because his life was in jeopardy within the Palestinian Authority for challenging President Abbas of the PA. And now Mahmoud Abbas is the major challenger to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas's leadership. Procuring these vaccines was an important humanitarian move by Dahlan. It showed that he cares about the lives of Palestinians. So far, 1,744 Palestinians have died from COVID. The vaccine is the Russian version called Sputnik 5, and this is the single largest shipment of COVID vaccines to date around the world. Dahlan may be very popular with the Palestinians, but he is persona non grata in the PA. He was tried in absentia and found guilty of challenging Abbas's publicly. Now, this humanitarian act of obtaining the vaccine for the people of Gaza seems to be a strategic power play by Dahlan. Remember, Abbas is 86 years old. No matter how hard he tries, he will not be able to remain PA president forever. Alon Helfgott, an 11-year-old boy from Kfar Saba, Israel, has had COVID-19 3 times. He had 3 different variants of the coronavirus. Alon contracted the Alpha variant, then he contracted the Delta variant, and now he has the Omicron variant. Now, despite it all, he's maintaining a positive attitude. According to this upbeat 11-year-old, he says, quote, "I'm fine, feeling pretty healthy, without so many symptoms. During the Alpha infection, I suffered from a high fever. My mother bought me some sweets from the supermarket, and I hope I get more things." Helfgott reports that around 10 of the 27 classmates in his class are currently ill. He acknowledged that, quote, "I miss being with my friends because the truth is there's nothing to do. You're shuttered at home and do nothing." Like most children with COVID, Alon's biggest hurdle is boredom. He is in isolation and alone, except for his phone. Having COVID-19 3 times is truly a unique experience. I wish Alon Helfgott good health. South Korea paid $18 million to the United Nations. The $18 million was to cover the cost of Iran's dues. Iran was $18 million in arrears to the United Nations. Being in arrears is nothing new for Iran. They are annually delinquent in paying their membership dues. Sanctions have been placed on Iran to make it very difficult for them to meet their international commitments. To accommodate, the United States relaxed restrictions and permitted the release of $7 billion from Iranian accounts that were in South Korean banks. The money was released specifically in order to pay dues, like the debts they owed the United Nations. South Korean Ministry of Finance confirmed the payment to the UN in Iran's name. The statement from South Korea read, and I'm quoting here, "Iran's right to vote at the General Assembly is expected to be restored immediately with the payment," unquote. It's all a part of a game called international diplomacy. Iran really needed their status restored in the UN. Iran really wants to be a world leader, and you cannot be a world leader if you are locked out of the United Nations. It's as simple as that. ISIS is having a resurgence. There was a prison break in northeast Syria. 100 ISIS terrorists in heavily equipped vehicles blew up the gates of the Guayar prison in the city of Hasaka. The prison housed 1,000 ISIS prisoners, many of them leaders of the ISIS movement. This prison break was not just about freeing ISIS leaders. Its purpose was to let it be known and clearly understood that ISIS is still around. As a result of the break, a massive battle ensued. Numbers are unclear, but there were many dead and many left wounded. The ISIS claimed that it actually freed 800 prisoners from the prison. There are about 10 prisons like this run by the United States and the Syrian Kurdish forces, known as the Syrian Defense Forces. ISIS is making a real play for power right now. This is just step one. Stay tuned for step two. Israeli experts say that Iran is only weeks away from having nuclear weapons. The Institute for National Security Studies of Israel prepares an annual survey to be delivered to Israel's president and prime minister. I refer to it every year. It is a survey of events from the past year and a set of predictions for the future. The most important takeaway from this year's report is that Iran has reached the status of having the ability to put a nuclear bomb together in just 2 weeks. The report also draws attention to Iran's proxies on Israel's border. Iran is sponsoring Hezbollah in Lebanon and Islamic Jihad and Hamas in Gaza, increasing tensions on Israel's borders. Finally, the survey predicted that as Palestinians get more and more frustrated by the lack of movement in the conflict between Israelis and the Palestinians, there will be increased anger and terror directed at Israelis by Palestinians. The report speaks of a stalemate in the peace process. That stalemate might even challenge the democratic nature of Israel, the report says. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Earlier, we looked at Louis Rene Barres's philosophy of international problem solving. Israel, or better, Judaism, has a set of philosophies on war and peace. They're best culled together by the Rambam, aka Maimonides, in his Mishnah Torah. Today, we would use the term curated by the Rambam. In his section called Hilchot Melachim, the Laws of Kings, the Rambam clearly describes the rules of war and peace, drawing on biblical and rabbinic sources. The essential point is that the land of Israel has a certain holiness to it, that Jewish leaders in Israel have important responsibilities that include justice and security for everyone within its borders. That is essential, that there are borders. The Rambam is not exactly clear what the borders are, but leaders have responsibilities to the Holy Land and all the people that live there. And as the Bible says in Leviticus, and as it is embossed on the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, proclaim liberty throughout the land to all the inhabitants thereof. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.